Hello, everybody. Welcome to Friday Fix. I'm Doc NYC's Artistic Director, Tom Powers. Today's episode is going to cover 3 documentaries that are available at online film festivals this weekend. The first project is Nationtime-Gary. That's an extraordinary document of the National Black Political Convention that took place in Gary, Indiana in 1972. The film was directed by William Greaves, a pioneering documentary maker who died 6 years ago. Nationtime-Gary is being shown online for free this weekend, courtesy of the AFI Docs Festival, and we'll put a link into the chat window so you can get more information. The second project we're going to discuss is a new 4-part series called City So Real about the Chicago mayoral elections last year. The filmmaker is Steve James, who's made a career out of covering Chicago in films like Hoop Dreams, The Interrupters, and his series America to Me. City So Real premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. It doesn't have distribution yet, but this weekend you can buy a ticket to watch it, also at AFI Docs online. And the third and final project we'll discuss is called When Liberty Burns. It's a timely documentary about police violence that took place in Miami in 1980. The film is showing online for a 1-day sneak preview just today, presented by the Miami Film Festival, and I'll be joined later by the film's director, Dudley Alexis. Want to remind you that on Fridays after Friday Fix, our friends at Firelight Media are now in the 3rd week of their series called Beyond Resilience. That show goes live at 4 o'clock, and you have up until 3:30 to RSVP for it, and we'll put a link in the chat window. So in a minute, I'm going to bring up our first guest, Shahla Lynch. Let me share about her. Her films include Chisholm 72, Unbought and Unbossed, that was released in 2004 about the presidential candidate Shirley Chisholm. Shahla's second film was Free Angela and All Political Prisoners, that premiered at the 2012 Toronto Film Festival. In addition to being a filmmaker, Shahla holds another key job as a curator of moving images at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem. I invited her today to talk about the legacy of William Greaves. Some viewers might know his 1970s experimental film, Symbio-Psycho-Taxiplasm, that you can watch on the Criterion Channel. But Greaves has a deep catalog of films that are harder to find, and one of them is Nationtime-Gary. In 1972, he captured a gathering of the country's political activists, Black political activists and politicians, including Jesse Jackson, Betty Shabazz, Amiri Baraka, Bobby Seale, and entertainers like Harry Belafonte and Isaac Hayes, who all gathered for a political convention in Gary, Indiana, city chosen because it was one of the few major cities that had a Black mayor, Richard Hatcher. So the reason I asked Shahla to come on and talk about this is she has a couple different credentials to bring perspective on this film. The first is her position at the Schomburg Center, where William Greaves's archives are stored. And second, her work as a filmmaker has paid a lot of attention to 1972, when Nationtime takes place. That was the year, of course, that Shirley Chisholm ran to be president. So before I bring on Shahla, let's take a look at a 1-minute trailer for Nationtime.
I tell you one thing, when this convention is over, the only thing I'll be sorry of that the Democrats and the Republicans wasn't here. So when they go back to get ready to run their convention this year, they could run it as mellow as we running ours. Bring more radical Black folks together in Gary than they can bring radical white folks together, and we don't have to spend no $400 million for the police. We're talking about doing the thing now. convention will come to order. The co-chairman who will chair today's session, Amamu Amiri Baraka, the chairman of the Congress of African People. Can we get all the delegations in here, please? Can we get everybody in their seats and quiet down? In the name of Nantana, Sojourner Truth, Mary McLeod Bethune, Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Martin King. What time is it? When we come together, what time is it? When we respect each other, what time is it?
All right. Now we're going to bring up Shahla. Like she's unmuted, and we'll get her video. Hey.
Hi, Tom.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for being here. So, Shahla, William Greaves was born in 1926. He started making films in the 1950s, and he was active up until his death 6 years ago. For people who don't really know William Greaves's work, can you just give a summary of his significance?
Sure. So Greaves himself actually said that he grew up in the shadow of the Harlem Renaissance. So, when he talks about his life as a cultural creator and filmmaker, it starts with seeing Oscar Michaud walking across the street near the Schomburg with suitcases that he thinks are films. He gets involved in acting. He's a kid at Stuyvesant. He goes to City College. He becomes enamored with the power of storytelling. And that really is what gets him, while he's in college, into filmmaking. And then his first job is at the National Film Board in Canada. And I think that's a really important point that happens in the 50s. And it's important because there he had training and he could practice being a filmmaker. Whereas in the United States, because of segregation, he couldn't get his foot in the door in the unions, right? So without training, we cannot be our best filmmaking selves.
I mean, something else I want to say about his work at the National Film Board, he made a film in the late 50s called Emergency Ward, which is it's a verite film. I mean, to the extent that you could say that at the time, it's an observational film. He's out with ambulances in the street, a few years before what many of us think of as the real, birth of American observational film, with Primary in 1960. So, it's significant to note that Greaves was ahead of that.
No, Greaves was completely ahead of that, and should be considered as part of our founding filmmakers when we talk about American verite. And it was actually Shirley Clark who saw that film and drafted him with some of her cohort to create films for the UN. This brought him back to the US. This is, in the middle of the civil rights movement, and he's ready to use his filmmaking as a tool for storytelling. And so it's from there that, he goes on to make something like 200 films that are collected and now at the Schomburg Center in the archives. And so Gary, Nationtime-Gary is one of them. And it is a film of this moment, Tom.
Very much so. So, let me talk about the way it's been lost and recovered. I interviewed Greaves 17 years ago and did a tribute to him at IFC Center in 2009. And this film wasn't on any list of things that we had access to at the time. Now it's been brought back through Sandra Schomburg's organization, Indie Collect, that's been doing remarkable work, bringing back all kinds of lost films. You were making Chisholm 72, film came out 16 years ago, but you're making it for a long time before that. Were you aware of Nationtime-Gary? Was that something you were trying to
Oh, completely aware of Nationtime-Gary. I mean, so one of the things is the standard media organizations were not so great about covering Black focused moments in history. And so Greaves, and if you look at the opening credits, so I encourage everybody to watch this film. And if you look at the opening credits, obviously it's a list of who's who that are there. And Greaves is there because coming out of Black Journal and all the filmmaking that he had done previously, he's a known entity and his lens is really important. The portraiture you see, the way you get to know the audience, the way it's edited together is all part of his point of view. I would also say that it's one of the cool things is that he worked with his son, David Greaves, who's still around, still making, etc. And of course, Louise Greaves, who is his wife and also producing partner and keeper of the legacy. She may actually be tuning in today.
I think also his brother Donald
Yes.
has a credit in the film. So it's
Yes.
a real family affair.
It's a real family affair. And what he brings to the table is not just his craft as a filmmaker, but also his knowledge of Black history and culture. And he's able to capture all of these moments. I mean, everybody who was anybody, not anybody, because Shirley Chisholm wasn't there. She was campaigning in Florida, but Amiri Baraka, you have Isaac Hayes, Dick Gregory, you have, of course, Queen Mother Moore, Richard Roundtree. The piece is narrated by Sidney Poitier, and poems by Langston Hughes are read by Harry Belafonte. You don't get that kind of mashup of lens and history without somebody like Greaves. And so the film still can resonate with us today. That is a mark of a true filmmaker, right? That it's of the moment, but then it also lasts. Oh, sorry.
It's live, folks.
Yeah, it's live, folks. Yeah, hopefully there'll be no kid and partner sightings. There we go. Phone's ringing.
So I wonder, if I can give you a little soapbox as an archivist. Maybe when people heard me say that William Greaves's archives are stored at the Schomburg Center, they could allow themselves a relaxation moment, like, oh, good, that's taken care of. But I mean, can you talk about the real need for attention, not only for things that are in an institution, a great but underfunded institution like Schomburg, but for all the things that don't have that protection?
Yes. So to go back and answer the Chisholm question, we knew about the film and we wanted to find it, and we couldn't find it. We could only find clips of it. And in fact, we used some of them and licensed them from other places, not realizing they were part of Nationtime. So his collection came to the Schomburg in the late 80s, and it was kept safely, but it wasn't completely processed. So one of the joys, the reason I'm there is history is important and our historical voices are important. It is like, we're the place where Black Lives Matter 24/7, 365 days a year. And Black history is not just a 1 month. And these voices were literally bound because they're just boxed up. And so the administrative work to raise the money, to get buy-in, to unearth all of that was really an impetus set by discovering Greaves's collection there. I mean, 500 boxes of his life's work. And, we were able to get downtown, et cetera, to help with the fundraising and raise the money for the entire collection to be processed. And so we're in the midst of that. So we're halfway through that process, but to your point, it requires money and it requires attention and it's slow, but the impact is so great. So when we talk about Black voices today, we have to have an understanding of nothing that is being said today is new. right? That that there is nuanced change, of course, but that need to express yourself has been around, and it's up for us to go back and kind of like, this is what I feel my mission is, to go back and unearth those voices to connect us together. So what does that mean? As a Black filmmaker, I want to understand Black filmography, right? I want to understand how that fits into American documentary filmography, and always be in conversation with all of those elements. And William Greaves is central to that because he's trained before so many other people, and then he goes on to help employ and train other people. So I would say, like, through Black Journal, you know, St. Clairborn, Madeline Anderson, Julie Dash, also Stan Latham, they're all part of his core group. And so it's exciting to see the baton passed over and over again.
I mean, one example I think of the power of telling history is what you did with Chisholm 72. And, you know, I think when it came out in 2004, it was a real revelation to people. And I remember you and I showed the film in 2008, the night Barack Obama was elected, and at AFI Center, and it still felt like an underappreciated chapter of history. Today, the name Shirley Chisholm, you know, comes up more often than I was aware, than I heard it 20 years ago. Just recently, there was the fictionalized, based on true events series, Mrs. America, where Rose Byrne is playing Gloria Steinem and Uzo Aduba is playing Shirley Chisholm. And Shirley Chisholm's campaign is a big part of that fiction film. I wonder how you've observed, since your film came out, the ways in which telling that story helped bring it more into a public conversation.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think when it comes to American history and people of color and women, we lack imagination. So what the responsibility of a storyteller and a filmmaker is to expand your idea of that past, those people, and those possibilities. So I can tell you, Shirley Chisholm is the first Black woman to run for president in 1972. And you could be like, great, snooze, you know, file it away. But if I show you this woman who comes out and says, I am Shirley Chisholm, Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, and I'm running for the presidency of the United States of America, split the screen and go bananas with imagery, then you're like, oh, you feel it. And that's what's that's what I love about our business. And that's what I love about our craft, is we bring history, historians, the work that they do, and also journalists, and we bring it together and we mash it up and we bring the public in a way so they feel something. And I think that's what's really critical for stories like that. So Chisholm's legacy is discussed now. I only wish she had lived longer, because I, you know, wanted that great biography. And you've been actually looking over the research and saying, you know, we've got so much information here, but, you know, maybe I'll do that. But yes, so the point is, it draws people in to the emotional core of what these stories are. And, you know, one of the things in Gary, Indiana, that is so striking in that film is that everybody's talking about the nation to recognize Black humanity. Right? And so the work of telling a story about Shirley Chisholm, or to in a real way tell the story about Gary, Indiana, is to acknowledge Black humanity and that fight.
That's great. So before I wrap up with you, can you just share with us what you're working on now?
Sure. Always the work at the Schomburg. People come by, talk to me post-COVID, because we're closed now. I'm working on an art piece for the Armory to celebrate the 100th anniversary of suffrage, celebrating 100 women artists. Haha. And I finished a piece on Flojo, the sprinter from the 80s, for ESPN. And if we can get past some legal issues with her estate, I hope we can present that soon. That's a really important story as well. She's still the world record holder.
That's fantastic. And you were a runner yourself, right?
Yes, I was a middle distance runner. Broke my first record at the age of 14, national record in the half mile. It may still stand, I'm not sure. But yeah, so sharp elbows, been trained to throw them. Right? Isn't that what we need in this entrepreneurial business? That's where I get my training.
I'm really grateful to you today, of all days on Juneteenth, to come on and talk about William Greaves.
Yes, National Liberation Day. I mean, part of why I came is because Greaves is an important voice, and we're talking about making clear and listening to the Black voices from the past and the present, and his work really helps do that. There is a forthcoming book, actually, I want to mention, that was edited by Scott McDonald and Jacqueline Stewart. I got to write an essay in it. I'm very excited that is coming out on him. He is an under-recognized voice in the history of independent Black filmmaking.
That's great. I know Firelight Media has some kind of fellowship in his honor these days. So that's.
Yes, and you know, Greaves was one of those people that touched many lives. I mean, I remember when he came to my Chisholm screening and he made a point of coming after me. That's Schomburg, and he shook my hand. You know, Stanley Nelson has Greaves stories too. He touched so many of us that, you know, we felt it in our hearts, and we helped carry on that legacy. So the William Greaves Fellowship is something to look into, particularly for younger filmmakers out there.
Yeah. Shahla, thanks so much. I look forward to having more opportunities to bring you back. It's been too long since I've gotten to see you, so it's great to do it now.
Thank you. Yes, always eager to talk about filmmaking, and of course, always making.
All right. Okay, so we're going to say goodbye to Shahla, and in a minute, bring up our next guest, Steve James. So, yeah, okay, so we said goodbye to Shahla. So as I said in my intro, Steve has a long history of telling stories about Chicago in films like Hoop Dreams and The Interrupters, and his 10-part series, America to Me, about a high school. And for the last year or more, he's been working on this 4-part series about Chicago's mayoral elections. They took place last year. It was an unusual field of candidates. You know, I think more than 20 people were vying at different times, of all backgrounds: Black, white, Latinx, maybe other kinds of politicians representing other demographics. This was taking place, the mayoral campaign was taking place against the backdrop of a Chicago police shooting of Laquan McDonald, who was shot 16 times, but the case was largely covered up for many months until the body cam footage of police officers finally reached the public. And after the public could see the killing with their own eyes, the uproar caused Mayor Rahm Emanuel to withdraw from seeking another term. So in City So Real, Steve and his crew are using the mayor's race to explore many different Chicago neighborhoods. We're going to watch a clip right now of this is a 1-minute clip from episode 1, and it has as its backdrop, it really invokes what was going on in Chicago around police shootings. So let me change my PowerPoint. No, it's all dead. Okay, here we go.
Snoop worked here every day. I didn't see him ever, out of the 3 years, being a violent person. Every barber build a relationship with their clients. Their clients become their friends. Their clients become their family. And that relationship has been broken. Not by choice, by force.
I'm really super tired of coming to these vigils. I don't know whether it's like for community violence or whether it's with police violence. Past 4-5 years, I have literally been to 100 of these. And today I have my attorney file a lawsuit against Chicago Police Department to release all video, all audio, all footage that was on the body cams immediately. You understand what I'm saying? And look. You think because we black, we ain't got the right to bear arms? We got that same constitutional right like anybody else. I got the right to not consent to search. Don't touch me. It ain't the BDs, it ain't the GDs, it ain't the malls, it ain't the Lord. Chicago Police Department is the biggest gang in Chicago, period, man. Rami Mayoral, we so tired of you, bro. Like, real talk. Laquan McDonald, we want justice for him. If we do not get justice for Laquan McDonald, every single African-American neighborhood across this city needs to rise up like this country has never saw before. Rise up and shut this city down. Should nothing move.
So the police officer that initially engaged you, was his camera supposed to be on? Hold on. You know what? That could be your son. That could be your child. That could be your child. Or maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe not. You got to find it. So are you out here from a crime?
We out here for the house. We out here for the black man gonna get shot tomorrow right here. We out here for the black man gonna get shot here tomorrow right here. We out here for the man gonna get shot tomorrow. We stand up for what we believe in. Don't talk to her. Don't talk to her like she a goddamn fool. Don't talk to her like she a fool.
Go ahead.
Help us. We trying to help us. Do something about these people. Help us.
Because when you're out of that uniform, they can kill you too because they're not gonna recognize you. If you go to a different district that they don't know you, you look like us. So that's not gonna know. Right is right and wrong is wrong. But y'all would never speak out against each other.
Okay, so bring up Steve now. You can unmute yourself. Hey, Steve, good to see you.
Good to see you, Tom.
So that clip we just saw, is maybe it's hard to reduce your filmmaking to just clips. Maybe it's an unfair way, but you deliberately have taken an expansive approach in a 4-part series with this. Can you describe what you were trying to do in telling the story and thinking and using the mayoral election as a landscape?
Sure. So for a long time, I've wanted to do a kind of portrait of Chicago. And Gordon Quinn and I made a stab at it some years ago, but we couldn't kind of get it to go anywhere. But, with this mayoral election rolling around, I thought this was the perfect time to try and do it because this was the most wide open mayoral election in a long time, especially once Rahm drops out, which happens while we were filming. And then that coupled with the Laquan McDonald trial, it just seemed like Chicago was at a crucial crossroads, if you will. And I've always thought of Chicago, I'm not alone in this. It's even been kind of known as the great American city, the most American of cities. And so I think that what's going on in Chicago is going on everywhere. And it's certainly never been more true and evident than right in this moment. But I wanted to have a kind of mosaic portrait that was about the election and about the trial, but wasn't just about those things. That was also a kind of serendipitous, if you will, portrait of the city. So that's how I got to 4 episodes.
Yeah. So I want to remind people they're playing right now at AFI Docs. You can watch them online through this weekend, I think through June 20th. That's tomorrow, maybe maybe it's still Sunday. I don't know, but go to AFI Docs. There's still time to watch this series. Can you talk to me about, some of your favorite moments in the series, things where what you were trying to do really clicked?
Yeah. Well, I really, there's a moment in the first episode, or two scenes in the first episode that play back to back that are special to me. One is actually a result of that clip we just saw. That clip was about a barber named Harith Augustus who was killed by the police. And so we went back to his barbershop about a month later because I was just curious to know more about who Harith was, because the news media had kind of moved on at that point to the next thing. And so we went back to the barbershop, and the idea was to, was to get a sense of who this man was that had been killed from the barbers and people that frequent the shop. That happened, but that wasn't the real story of the scene. And in the movie, what happens is that this postal worker walked in, a black postal worker who had never been in that barbershop, and to get his haircut. And what led was this, really for me, this sort of incredible conversation about privilege, but as it related to being black for the postal worker who was an ex-military guy, and the guys in the shop who feel like they had not had any advantages at all in life. And, of course, to me as a white guy, I'm looking at the postal worker, he's a totally self-made man, right? I mean, he's a heroic individual in his own right, but it was a really revealing conversation. And then we paired that inspired us, and this was part of the idea of the film, was we use things that happen to drive us to the next thing. Inspired in many ways by Chris Marker film, La Jolie Mai, that I saw many, many years ago and was really taken with. And so that inspired us to go to a white barbershop in Bridgeport. And that scene plays out on the heels of it. And it's quite humorous for a while. They're old retired guys mostly giving each other a lot of crap. But towards the end, it's revealed that they're actually ex-police officers, and they have some pretty strong opinions about what's going on now. So that's one example.
I want to ask you, in light of all the recent events this month, I should say, speaking for myself as someone who grew up in Detroit, felt like I went to high school in Detroit and had been thinking a lot about race throughout my life. I find myself this month, recognizing real shortcomings in my own perceptions and certainly my own actions, and in not doing more and thinking harder about this. I wonder what you've been going through, because you're certainly someone who's, been involved, covering a lot of Black lives in films going back to Hoop Dreams. What have been your personal reflections? Well,
I probably have gone through some of the same things you have. I mean, no matter how many films one may make and that focus on issues of race in America, there's always plenty more to learn and plenty more to do. And, so I'm still on that same journey that for me started in high school, I think, going to living in a community that was very much divided by race, although not violently so, thank God, in Virginia. And so I'm really excited about the moment we're living in. I've been out filming what may very well be an episode 5 for this series. That's going to deal with the pandemic and also the upheaval in Chicago, which has been profound and significant. So it's been really amazing for me to be out filming in this moment too, because we've got footage of, police violence and against protesters and the loot, there's all that stuff everyone has seen on the internet. And certainly we might feature that. But the thing that has really been really good for me is to really try to dig in and reconnect with people from the series and find out how their lives have been impacted by this. And one of the things I've been asking people is, do you think that, what I've encountered is a lot of Black people saying that they really do greatly appreciate the white support that's been going on in this time. The protesters, people stepping up, speaking up. So there's great appreciation for that. I think, a question is, will that sustain? Will that be there, let's say, if we're fortunate enough to push Trump out of office? Or will people feel like they did their part and go back to their lives as they were? And I think for a lot of people that I've encountered in the African American community, that's a kind of very fundamental question. But there's no doubt that there's a feeling, and I feel it, and I think a lot of people feel that this time it's different than it's been for a long time.
So you've been filming with Mayor Lori Lightfoot. I hope it's not a spoiler for people who are going to watch your film, but you could Google that. But Mayor Lightfoot, has, I know in Chicago, been very visible during the time of the pandemic. There were some funny memes about her scolding people from being on the lakeshore during the pandemic and so forth. What if, lots of times we make documentaries about elections, and I always feel like a real shortcoming of those films is that they end kind of right when the most interesting part begins, when someone actually has to go in office and now make good on their campaign promises. In your filming post-election, what have you witnessed about the struggles of Mayor Lightfoot ran on a progressive platform, and now she has to live up to the things that she promised?
Yeah, and before I answer that, I just want to say, for those who might be thinking about watching the series, even though this political campaign is sort of the central spine of it, I like to think that what we've made here is not a typical political film, because we're not really about the horse race so much. I mean, we tell you what happens and you see it happen, but just because Lori Lightfoot won the mayor race doesn't mean, oh, it's not gonna, I don't need to watch that, because it's really, I think it's a different kind of political engagement that we're trying to achieve with this film and looking at an election. And so in the subsequent shooting that I've done, I mean, one of the things that people felt who are Chicago based particularly, and who are much more activists, was that, Lori Lightfoot was a candidate who literally came out of nowhere. She was polling at 2.8% with a month to go for the first round of the election, and she won that. She came from, way back and won, which was a surprise, but she was also very much an unknown to most people as a result of that. She wasn't part of the Democratic political machine, although she was someone who had held positions of prominence in government in Chicago. And so I think this has been a tough one. I mean, I think when the pandemic hit, she kind of hit her stride after having gone through, when she first got elected, a protracted teacher strike that was not good for anybody, and certainly not good for her as a mayor, I think. And when the pandemic hit, I think she kind of hit her stride, in the memes and things you were talking about were kind of a way of saying that she was being that tough love mother to the city and looking out for our best interest. But with the upheaval that has happened in the wake of George Floyd, it's really exposed some real fissures within the progressive community in Chicago, not just between progressive and more conservative people. And this is a tough time to be mayor of Chicago. I guess I'll just say that. But I think what this episode will do is what you're asking for, is that we will be able to sort of take stock of someone who's never been a politician before, trying to run a major American city at a very difficult moment.
Well, I'm really glad that you're doing that continuing work. I haven't yet gotten to watch all 4 hours, but the 2 hours that I have seen were really rewarding viewing, especially as someone who has a deep feeling for Chicago. My brother and sister live there, of course, and
I know.
And as a Detroiter, Chicago is always the big city to go to. So I hope people get a chance to see it this weekend and at AFI Docs. And Steve, I really appreciate you taking the time and to speak with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show, Tom. Always great to see you.
Okay. Now we'll let Steve go, and I will set up our third guest, Dudley Alexis. He is based in Miami. He directed the documentary Liberty in a Soup about a Haitian New Year's Day tradition. And his new film is called When Liberty Burns. It looks at an uprising that occurred in 1980 when 4 Miami police officers were acquitted in the case of the death of Arthur McDuffie. The film had its premiere at the Miami Film Festival in March. And that was the last week that any film festivals were taking place still in person. But it's having an additional special screening online today as a special for Juneteenth. And in about an hour at 4 o'clock Eastern time, Dudley is going to be doing a Facebook Live with Miami Film Festival with several key people in the film. Dudley, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Before I get into our interview, Dudley, I'm going to share a trailer of the film. Give me a second to bring that up. So let's look at that trailer.
I think a lot of young people have no idea what McDuffie was. No idea. As a matter of fact, I don't think it. I know it. The older people, it has a lasting effect, I think.
This is where the chase ended, and here is where the questions begin. McDuffie crashed his motorcycle, but some of the wounds he sustained are not consistent with the accident.
Some substantial use of force was used at the scene after the chase, and the subject died of critical injuries resulting from that use of force.
People just exploded. It was almost like someone had gone along, struck a match and threw something. Boom.
Scared us. It scared me quite a bit.
I think this is one of the worst things that has happened in Miami, and I am very, very disappointed that someone was not held responsible for it.
So, obviously very timely. It feels like that could be happening today. Dudley, what was it that made you want to tell this story from 1980?
Well, what happened right before I started doing this documentary, I was working. I just finished my first feature documentary, and I was driving to work, and a friend of mine that I grew up with, went to high school together, got an altercation with the police, and that day it happened on I-95. In Miami, so they blocked I-95, and I was complaining the whole day about traffic. And when I got to work and I learned about my friend and what happened, I started researching about Miami Police Department and the history of Miami Police Department and the relationship with the Black community here. And I found out about the story of Arthur Lee McDuffie. Growing up in Miami, that was a surprise to me because no one talks about it. No one knows that much about it, especially from my generation. So from there, I started doing the research, and the more research I do, the more I felt like this is a story that needed to be told.
Liberty in this title refers to Liberty City, a Black community in Miami that where during this time of uprising in 1980, you really suffered badly. As you dug into the story, the film, well, let me say this. You told me about this film a couple of years ago. You came to a class that I was giving in Miami and said that you were working on this. And I didn't really know what it would be. Lots of people come up to me at these classes, and it's hard to know what's going to come of that. But I was so impressed when I got to see the film at how many people you interviewed, the depth of research that you found, and really, uncovered a chapter that I, very faintly knew about a city that I spent a lot of time in working at the Miami Film Festival. What was the process for you to excavate that history?
Well, the first thing I've done is read a lot of the books about the history of Miami, and a lot of the books did not go much about that much details, and from there I started reading a lot of the newspapers. And from the newspaper, a lot of the people actually I've interviewed, I've learned about them reading the newspapers and highlighting their names and start looking for them. But at the same time, I was going to archival footage, newsreel that was happening of stuff that was happening at the same time. It took me, I had so many newsreel to look at. It took me like almost a year to go to all of them and to catalog all of them, see which footage I can use and which one. And from there, it was helpful to learn so much about the city too. And the books help, the historical books help. That's something I suggest a lot of people, a lot of the filmmakers, when they start doing those projects, to actually, there's a lot of the research, a lot of the historians that wrote wonderful books about their work. And one thing also I did is when you reading those books, I make sure sometimes they have their own references. I tend to go to the back of the book, read all the references that they actually had, and actually go and read them myself, because sometimes they have detail that doesn't really concern the books, that might concern more my project. So yeah.
Let me ask you about the archival footage, because we were talking about that earlier in the show with Shahla Lynch, the places where archives are sometimes blank on Black history, or sometimes if they're archives that were taken through mainstream news media, were through a specific filter, sometimes a very, racist or racially blind filter. I wonder, as you were trying to, dig into that history through local news archives, what were the things you were finding? What were the things you were looking for and were harder to find?
Well, going to the archives, I've run into that problem. A lot of the Black history it's almost hard. It's really hard to find them, the way they archive them. And that was one of the struggle doing this project in Miami. In Miami, fortunately, we have the Black Archive here in Miami that does a really great job in archiving some artifact that in regard to the Black experience in Miami, and also the Wolfson Archive did a really good job of catalog some of the stories regarding Black residents in Miami. But at the same time, there are certain stuff that I hear coming from whole history, and I'm looking for the actual stuff from the archives that I don't have them. And that was pretty unfortunate for me doing this project. But at the same time, I will meet people that will have stuff in their house that are really great artifacts, but I don't know where to put them. And that's the other struggle that I had, and I was dealing with doing this project.
Because you do dig up some photographs and some footage that totally apart from you know, this terrible, the terrible events in 1980, but that really bring Miami's Black history and Black community to life. Those were really nice to see.
Yeah, those were coming from the Wolfgang archive, which was really, I was really lucky. That's one of the few archive they have about, few archival footage that they have about Overtown, which is the segregated community that was created from the 1910, from the late 1800s to until that's still here right now.
And then Overtown was impacted.
It was impacted by the highway that was built to it, and pretty much by that highway going to Overtown caused like the migration from Overtown to Liberty City, and that's how you end up having that same community just migrated to a new segregated section of the city. And one other thing I was trying to find, actually, there's a wall that separated the Black section of Miami from the white section. It was kind of hard to find that particular, even a picture of that wall from that time. And the wall was.
This was like a little, like 10-foot tall wall. Today, I remember an image of it. Today, it's been kind of reduced. You can see
Today it's like 2 feet tall.
Yeah, you can see the line of it, but it's hard to see that history without getting a visual of that wall.
Yeah.
Can you talk about being a filmmaker in Miami? You know, much of the media is concentrated in New York, Los Angeles. You know, much of the documentary community, we certainly see regional documentary outposts like Cartemquin in Chicago, where Steve James works, but and Miami has a lot of strong filmmakers working there, but nowhere near the kind of same infrastructure or you know, access to the people who make decisions about distribution that exist in New York and Los Angeles. So you know, I wonder about what are some advantages or disadvantages you feel about being in a city with a smaller community.
Well, one thing that is right, we do not have the same infrastructure in LA or New York, but that make it unfortunate for us to find distribution. There's a lot of great talents here, but one thing that I love the fact that I'm in Miami and telling there's a lot of new stories people never heard before that are coming out of Miami, and I'm happy I'm part of that. And I've, you know, some of my friends and some people I've met, some of the filmmakers here in Miami, their stories are so powerful. Some, you know, they're new stories, you know. Miami is so diverse in so many ways. And we have the Caribbean, it's a mixture of the Latin America, Caribbean, and the US all meeting in one place. And I think that melting pot allow us to create new type of stories people never heard before. And that's one thing I love about Miami, to be able to, and I think Miami is being overlooked by some of the storytellers that we have coming out. And I would like, you know, distributors to start paying attention more to the city and some of the great filmmakers are coming out of Miami. Because some of the stories, some of the work I've seen some of my friends, you know, they're phenomenal, you know, and you know, from you know, I'm trying to think, you know, now, but a lot of them are really phenomenal work.
Well, I mean, certainly Moonlight a couple of years ago was a, you know, a signal around the world of what kind of talent exists in Miami. As we wrap this up, you know, when you've been making this film for a couple of years now, it's coming out in this moment where where questions about police violence in the Black community are suddenly on everyone's mind. I wonder, you know, how you're thinking about the material you've been working on for a couple of years, if you're thinking about it in a different way you know, as you see what's going on around the country right now?
You know, when I was working on the film, I was trying to finish it like before the 40th anniversary of the whole incident that happened in Miami, and I wanted to do it in a way to bring the history, so something can be, so we cannot repeat those same mistakes, and so we can learn why those actually happened. That's one thing I was trying to focus on. Learn why those moments keep happening in history. So when working on this project for the past it was like 3 years really. For the past 3 years, I had a sense something like that was going to happen again, and I just didn't know it was going to be in that scale. But because even some of the people I was interviewing was telling me, even in the city of Miami, they feel the same thing is brewing and the same thing is going to happen again. I think, you know, looking at what's happening now, I feel there's a lot of things to look at. Not, you know, from looking at policy, and I think it goes, you know, facing those stuff go beyond just policies. It goes into, you know, looking at that, you know, the culture that allow, you know, white supremacy to take hold and really challenge that.
Well, I hope people get to see When Liberty Burns. If you're in the US, you can watch it today. I saw someone in the chat asking when they can see it in the UK. I know, Dudley, you're still figuring out your distribution for it. You know, certainly here in New York, we'll look for opportunities to showcase it for our audiences. For people who want to follow the project and your news about distribution, where should they go?
Well, they can follow us at Liberty Burns Doc on Twitter and When Liberty Burns on Instagram, and also our Facebook page.
Great. And so I very much appreciate you joining us today, because I know in an hour you've got another conversation on Facebook Live that the people can also tune into, and you're going to have many of the people who are involved in this. Dudley, thank you very much for taking the time and for this film.
No, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
All right, it's a pleasure. All right, as I wrap up here, I want to remind you, as always, whoops, here we go, to check out our Monday memo that you can subscribe to for free. We deliver an email newsletter to you every Monday that gives you the week's documentary news. I want to give a big thanks to the Doc NYC team, Sarah Modo, Caitlin Boyle, and Raphael Nehausen. Again, thanks to our guest, Shahla Lynch. Shahla, I see you in the chat. Thank you for all your contributions. We will have to come back and have a larger conversation about archives, because it's a favorite topic of mine, and I know you have so much to say about it. Thank you to Steve James, and we look forward to seeing more of City So Real. You can see the first 4 parts this weekend at AFI Docs. Thank you to Dudley Alexis. Please try to make time today to see When Liberty Burns at the Miami Film Festival. William Greaves' film, Nationtime-Gary, is available to watch for free at AFI Docs for the rest of the weekend. Do yourself a favor and see that. We hope that you will join us again next Friday. We'll be announcing our guest list on Monday. Have a good weekend. Have a happy Father's Day, and be well.